2007 for his book, Debates in Indian Philosophy, Classical, Colonial, and Contemporary. He has served as a visiting faculty at different universities in India as well as abroad. His credentials include authoring books, publications at various national and international journals, newspaper articles, contributions in Telugu literature and culture. Professor Raghuram Raju has also presented papers at numerous seminars and delivered lectures. He is a member in different communities, reviewer of books and journals, including Oxford University Press, Routledge, New Delhi, Journal of World Philosophies, Journal of Indian Council of Philosophical Research, and the list goes endless. He also writes a monthly column in a daily newspaper, The Telegraph. The Teaching Learning Center at Ramanujan College is highly indebted to you, sir, for sparing your valuable time and coming over to deliver a lecture. I now request you, sir, to take over and preside over the session.
Can I start?
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nidhi. And I'm extremely thankful to Professor Ganapati for asking me to, and General Nisha for asking me to speak to you today. I will leave around 3 o'clock because I have something else to do, which I could not excuse myself. But tomorrow I am available even beyond 3 o'clock. So what I want to do today is to begin with a statement that in a way summarizes a large temporal period or historical period. And that is, I want to claim that there is a thinking or philosophy post Shankaracharya, and most of the time, both those who are in favor of Indian philosophy or even Hinduism or Buddhism, or those who are critical about these schools of philosophy, inadvertently or talking or inhabiting this domain called the post-Shankara period. Now, I wanted to say here that the post-Shankara period is a very important period, but it is a period which I characterize as a refrigerated, a period where philosophy got refrigerated, philosophy got frozen. Now, there is nothing wrong with it. It is necessary to freeze things. It is necessary to dry things in the opposite, if you are using this metaphor in an opposite direction, in order to transport, in order to, make different uses of things. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with that. But then there is something that is the cost that you pay in getting these things frozen, or to use exactly the opposite metaphor, to dry, as it were, this lively tree, or this, this natural flow of water. See, imagine that the water is naturally flowing and then it is refrigerated. Now, the refrigerated water, you can take it wherever you want to, make use of it in different domains, but then you will not get the charm of that flow which Tennyson talks about. Man may come and man may go, but I go on forever, things like that. So there is something very beautiful about that flow, but that flow gets frozen, so to say, in this process. Or alternatively, look at a tree and which is growing, blossoming and things like that, shedding tree, leaves, and then there is spring and there is autumn and things like that. and suddenly you cut the tree and make a timber out of it. And of course, you can make enormous use of the dried timber, but then the dried timber will not have that life in it. So I want to claim that there is a period that resembles the flowing water or the growing tree prior to the frozen water or the dried wood. And that is what I wanted to present before you today. And this is a period that is not a block period. It is a period that had some interesting stages or interesting dimensions. And unfortunately, many teachers of philosophy, including Zahir Nisha and Balaganpati, will not be very happy with me when I say this thing. Most of the teachers of Indian philosophy do not pay enough attention to this. On the contrary, they are preoccupied with the second phase. And I am very unconventional. I'm not radical, but unconventional. I'm unconventional. So I find the other side more exciting. And then I try to look at that in the following way today. And that is a period, as I said, that precedes this Shankaracharya. But then the period is not a block period. It is a period that at least has three important phases. And I wanted to briefly bring to your attention those three important phases. And the first phase is available in Upanishads. Okay, so many of you, while teaching Indian philosophy, do discuss Upanishads. But somebody can ask you this following question, saying that, why should I read Upanishads today? Okay, the answer is you have to read Upanishads because you have to do a course in Indian philosophy. And then why do you have to do a course in Indian philosophy? Because you're in India. No, not that there are no courses of Indian philosophy outside India, but largely. But even sociologically speaking, most of the courses of Indian philosophy are not in philosophy departments, they're in philosophy departments of religion. Anyway, there may be some exceptions to it, but largely that is a fact. So why should you read Upanishads? The answer could be that, you're doing a course on Indian philosophy, and Indian philosophy is because, like Western philosophy, we are in India. So earlier it was not a fashion, but now it is also becoming a fashion to do Indian philosophy, which is good. There's some change, but then you have to be very careful about these changes. So why should you read? Because I read because I'm doing a course on Indian philosophy. And then one might say, I'm not interested. And there's not a very, substantial answer. It is a notional answer. The other reason that one could give to oneself, not to other, if you ask yourself, it is not that somebody has to ask you these questions. In philosophy, you can ask this question to yourself. Why am I reading Upanishads? And the answer could be, I'm reading Upanishads because there are parallels between Greek philosophy and Upanishads. Okay, both Plato and Chandogya Upanishad talks about the importance of non-being. Okay, and then they present to you how being emerged out of non-being, how being emerged out of non-being. So there are parallels. So if I find something X in the West and same thing in India, so why should I go to West? I would read it here. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why these private universities are, if you look at the idea for private universities in India, new private universities, they are based on this, that, our people are going abroad to America and these places. Now let's create universities like that in India so that they don't go, and they don't go now. I mean, there are a lot of people who go to, private universities in India, and it is based on that. So why do you read it? I read it because instead of reading Plato, I can read Upanishads and find the same things discussed. For instance, the question of non-being. There can be a third reason why I should read Upanishads, and that is that I read Upanishads out of curiosity. Okay, I am in 21st century, and then I'm curious to know, what did my ancients do? What is their lifestyles? What did they think? What is the nature of their preoccupation, physical or intellectual? It is an intellectual curiosity. But then somebody might not be curious enough. Okay, somebody might still ask questions which are in the following. Namely, what is the special thing that is there in Upanishads that makes me read Upanishads? Now, my answer to this while reading Upanishads is that it has certain things that is in addition to what is available in Plato and other Western metaphysical texts. For instance, in the Western metaphysical text, you have a particular kind of relationship, largely in a conformitum, from being to non-being. Sorry, from non-being to being. So Plato talks about it. And then you have Deleuze, who talks about Plato talks about it, and several other people like, Husserl talks about it, Heidegger talks about nothingness, and then Sartre talks about it, even Bergson talks about it. And then you have Deleuze, who writes a book called Bergsonism, where he discusses the relationship between being and non-being in Bergson. Now, I have seen this trajectory, visited it, thoroughly, and I found that there are certain things in Upanishads which are more exciting than they are available in Western metaphysics. And that is, you have different versions about the relationship between being and non-being, and non-being and non-being, non-being and being. Okay, so if somebody asks me, why should I read Upanishads? My answer is, there are things in Upanishads at a global level, at an international level, which are more creative and profound and complex than what I get in Western philosophy or Western metaphysics. So that's the reason why I read these things. So now, what is it that interests me in Upanishads is not what interests teachers of philosophy in India, teachers of Indian philosophy in India. Namely, if you look at any book on Indian philosophy, history of Indian philosophies and any other books on Indian philosophy, the prominent discussion about Upanishads is about Brahman and Atman and the relationship between Atman and Brahman. Okay, that is the prominent relation. I do not want to get into that area that has interested other people. On the contrary, what interested me is not what is said in Upanishads, which is about the relationship between Atman and Brahman. On the contrary, what interests me in Upanishads is who is the one who is speaking? Who is the one to whom it is spoken? Who is the one who is listening to it? These are the three things that interest me. So I'm not interested in what is spoken, which is important, but doesn't interest me. What interests me immediately is who is speaking. And here I ask, is it a male who is speaking alone, or are there women too? Are there women too? Now, I'm not just trying to say that, no, I mean, close the ledger, so to say, but open the ledger and ask people to make, indent the various things that they find. Okay, as you keep listening, see, just look at it. Are there only men? Are there women too? What is the caste, breakup of people who are in Upanishads speaking, spoken to, or hearing? Okay, that is what interests me. And I find that there is more variety in Upanishads in comparison to all the dialogues of Plato. In the dialogues of Plato, there are no women, except there is Diotima, who is supposed to be the teacher of Socrates. These men claim her to be teacher, but she is not present. She is absented very comfortably. Whereas, if you look at Upanishads, you find a different range of people speaking. Even though they are from the dominant caste, it is not that the caste, other castes, or people outside the caste are completely absent. So it will be interesting and exciting to retrieve the profile of the people who are there inside this arena called the Upanishads. So that is what interests me. What interests me more, apart from this sociological curiosity or inquiry, is what is the mode of philosophizing that is available in Upanishad. In other words, what is it that they are doing? Now, if you ask me, what is Plato doing? They are all discussing. They are debating. They are called dialogues. So what is Descartes doing? He is meditating. What is Kant doing? He is writing critics. What is Hegel doing? He is writing a phenomenology of spirit. So what is Marx doing? He is writing about the capital. They're all writing, or they are in a dialogue. Now, with this background, if you ask, what is the major preoccupation in Upanishads? One major preoccupation in Upanishads is inquiry. If you look at the Upanishads, the nerve center that throbs all over the Upanishads, scattered all over the place, is each one is inquiring. So the inquiry is important and pervasive. And as a student of philosophy, I am interested in indenting so to say, indenting what is the nature of inquiry in Upanishads. What is the nature of inquiry in Upanishads? What are the aspects of inquiry in Upanishads? What are the different shades of inquiry in Upanishads? What are the different levels of inquiry in Upanishads? This is what interests me while reading Upanishads. Okay, now, inquiry is not merely open-ended because there is a predictability about it. Because they're always trying to say there is a Brahman who is permanent and the real world is not permanent. Okay. In fact, it will be interesting and maybe shocking to many teachers of Indian philosophy in India to know that Satkaryavada and Asatkaryavada, about which there is so much of writing that has that is available in Indian philosophy, has its roots in Upanishads. That is, how did being come from non-being? That is the first seed, root, origin for Asatkaryavada. Because please remember, being and non-being are opposed to each other. So how can being, which is entirely different from, opposed to non-being, come from non-being? Okay, so now you have a situation in the Chandogya Upanishads where they say, oh, that is not possible. So it is not that there was nothing, no non-being, and being came out of nothing. There was a self, and the self gave rise to other self. And why did the self give rise to other self? Because the self, which is called as primordial being, felt lonely. And being alone gave rise to fear. And then they immediately said that fear comes not out of loneliness. Fear comes when other person is there. So other is responsible for fear, but then that is not pursued. And there is but then they say that if I am alone, I may not be afraid of the other, but there is no delight in being alone. So you remember now, a new term comes into the picture, that there is no delight for a person who is alone. Hence, the primordial being finds the need for the other, and he then creates a woman from his thigh. You know, understand the parallels between Christianity and Chandogya Upanishads. And the woman, he wants to mate with her, but she runs away. And why does she run away? She says that I am your daughter, so you cannot mate with your daughter. So she runs away, but then he chases her. All these things are there in Upanishads, and I'm just not cooking up these things. She chases her, and then she becomes a cow and he becomes an ox. And then animals don't have this, this problem. The creation begins. Now, please look at those two things. I wanted to bring it to your attention, two different perspectives which are running parallel. The first perspective is that there is a theology. And what is the theology? The theology is that there is a primordial being who is trying to get into, there's no delight in his life, and then he creates a woman. But then immediately from this theology, you get another thing that gets inserted into the discussion, which is evolution. And now, you're starting from animals, the cow, and then the evolution starts from there. So this is a U-shaped kind of a thing, which is what fascinates me. How did these people imbricate two different conflicting frames in the Western, biology and theology in a single mode? Okay, you know that there is a big debate, quarrel between the creationist and the evolutionist. Now you find in a very primitive, in a very, in a small way, microcosm way, brief, but very pregnant with metaphors, with symbolism. So that's the point that I want to do. So this lively aspect of the inquiry is an important aspect available in the Upanishads that needs attention of teachers of Indian philosophy. So why I am interested in reading Upanishads? I am interested in reading Upanishads not out of curiosity or nationalism or whatever it is, because I find there is something which is available that is not available outside. So that's the first thing. And second, that I'm not interested in finding about what is said in Upanishads, but who is speaking, okay, and to whom is this, and who is listening. And the fourth one, which I took some time to explain, is what is the nature of inquiry? Because inquiry is very pervasive. What is the nature of inquiry? And then I find that the nature of inquiry is a very, very interesting domain. And that is the reason why I take interest in the first phase that precedes the Shankara type of Indian philosophy that is inhabited by those who criticize Indian philosophy and those who praise Indian philosophy. That's the first point. So this is the phase one that I have presented very briefly to you. And then there is a phase two, which is equally remarkable, unprecedented in the world history, unprecedented in the world history. And that comes in the form of Badarayana, who is the compiler par excellence. He is the first compiler the world has produced. He is the first compiler the world has produced. He is the person who clarified many things to me, deburdened me. I felt reading Badarayana was like, a donkey which is made to carry two full loads of sacks of salt comes across a river. Okay? And then all the salt melts away and then you feel nice. So when my teachers have loaded me with so much of philosophy, which I was not able to carry, suddenly there is a Badarayana who came like a river. I just swam through because I know swimming, and all the burden has just disappeared. I felt so relieved. And then I felt that, oh my God, what a relief it is. Okay, so that is Badarayana for me. So Badarayana did this wonderful service. I didn't have salt in my life, but I also don't have to do this carrying loads and of that thing. I'm ready to live without salt, because that I have a BP, so I'm not supposed to eat salty food, so which is good for my health, though I am the taste is compromised. That's fine. So reading Badarayana brought that kind of a relief. So what did I find in Badarayana? After reading Badarayana, I found I started really understanding deconstruction, hermeneutics, traditions in philosophy. So wherever you go, they would always talk about this thing. I was feeling very guilty that, I've been reading deconstruction, Derrida and all these things, but I'm not able to understand them properly. So I was feeling very guilty. Okay. So I, thoroughly read of grammatology, then all kinds of things. It's not that I don't read Western philosophy. I read thoroughly Western philosophy. It's very important for me to read Western philosophy. But I don't want to get burdened by reading Western philosophy. I want to get relief from reading Western philosophy. So what happened was that after reading Badarayana, it came to my mind that Derrida is making a central claim, or entire deconstruction is making a central claim. What is the central claim? The central claim is that there is a text that oppresses you, and they were trying to say, no, interpretation is also important, and they go to the other extreme saying that interpretation alone is important, things like that. We remember Ronald Barthes, the death of an author and birth of a reader and things like that. Then, a whole lot of things, interpretation and over-interpretation by the edited by, and things like that, and record, Gadamer. Now, to my shocking, I found that the scene in India is exactly opposite. And what is opposite? It is opposite in the following way. In the West, you have an oppressive text which does not allow, and there is an official interpretation and doesn't allow any room for other kinds of interpretation. And there is a reaction to it, fighting against that. But if you come to India, you find exactly opposite. Now, it is Badarayana who compiled Vedanta Sutras or Brahma Sutras, and there are these Prasthanatrayas who wrote commentaries on it. Now tell me, who is more popular in India? Interpreters or original compiler? Huh?
Interpreters, sir.
If interpreters, Jairu, then is Derrida useful to us when we deal with these people? Because Derrida is responding to a problem. What is the problem, Jairu? That there is a text which is oppressive, and you are fighting, saying that no, interpreters are all important. Now, if you look at India, what is happening is there is a text called Badarayana's Vedanta Sutras, and there are interpretations. Now, what do you know more, interpretations or text? Who is known more in India, interpreters or text? Interpreters.
Text.
We know more about Shankara than Badarayana. In Tirupati, there are two Sanskrit universities. I've been asking them to teach me Badarayana's Brahma Sutras. All of them either teach me Shankara's interpretation or Ramanuja's interpretation. I tell them, I'm not interested in that. You teach me the Badarayana. There's nothing like that. Now, if Derrida is an answer to the question of an oppressive text, now, do you have the oppressive text in India? You have, in fact, exactly the opposite, where the Bechara, the original compiler, is not known. Do you teach Badarayana in your Indian philosophy course? As you teach Plato? Plato is also a compiler. Okay, you teach Plato, but do you teach Badarayana? But you don't even teach Xenophon's version of Socrates. There is a Xenophon who also has written the dialogues of Socrates, and there is a variance between Plato's version and Xenophon's version. We don't even teach that. We only teach Plato's, a philosophy. But here, is there anybody in this world, not just in India, who teaches Badarayana? And why, madam? Is it because we are poor? Is it because we have no nuts, brains? So this is the point that I wanted to bring it to your notice. Now, apart from this scandal, there is something which is very important in Badarayana. As I mentioned to you, Badarayana is the first compiler the world has produced. And there could be two reasons, and it's necessary to explore this. Badarayana may have compiled because with the advent of Buddhism, there is this danger that the Hindu, the Vedanta tradition, the Upanishadic tradition might just disappear. So he wanted to, he is trying to react to Buddhism, or he was trying to consolidate. Because as I mentioned to you, what is important in Upanishads is inquiry. But then there should be something, some product out of inquiry, and that was not done by them. So it's Badarayana who has come up with a very systematic methodology. I read Badarayana's Brahma Sutras along with reading Gadamer's Truth and Method. Understand? These are the method, one of the biggest, one of the grand idea of method in Hermeneutic tradition gets unveiled in Gadamer's Truth and Method. And I found that in Badarayana, the methodology that he adopts is very ingenious, and he is first person. Anyway, he is the first person. Okay? He is the first person, and there is an ingenious methodology to that is there in him. So that is the reason why I thought that it is necessary to pay attention, visit this important site of philosophical excitement. And I was really, it preoccupied me endlessly, for months together. I just was not, even when I was talking at home with other people, friends and other people, I was actually not talking to them. Okay, I was immersed in the world of Badarayana, not his interpreters. Like you people who are interested in the interpreters of Badarayana, I was not interested in the interpreters. I was only interested in the original compiler. And please remember, compilation after inquiry is one of the important genres that is available in this period that I referred to. So in the first period, what attracted my attention is inquiry. In the second period, what attracted my attention is the compilation. Okay? And the method adopted by Badarayana in making this compilation. And now let me come to the third phase and become more unpopular amongst the teachers of Indian philosophy. And that is, come to the third phase, and then I meet somebody who is very, very exciting. He's not only exciting in the first phase of inquiry, it is exhilaratingly exciting. In the second period, there is some discipline. Okay, after going around, inquiring, now you have to come and put all of them together. Okay, like after doing all the shopping, you have to bring all your things and put them in a, in your dicky. Okay, so it required some kind of discipline. But following the same way, there is another third person who was remarkably, adventurous. And that person is Gaudapada. That person is Gaudapada, who wrote this Karika on Mandukya Upanishads, which is one of the fascinating works, but scandalously ignored by people, particularly in the departments of philosophies. Okay, it's an astonishing thinker, but scandalously, ignored, kept aside by the departments. And it's remarkable that how did they manage to do this hiding is something which is very remarkable. In fact, one could write a thesis on it. Okay, because managing the absenting other people is not that easy. So they must be, they have a lot of cognitive competence to do that. But then, I'm old, so I don't think I will have time and that enthusiasm to pursue that kind of a thing. So what do you find in Gaudapada is yet another important genre in the history of the world. Okay, that's why I'm not interested in just at the level of India or regional things. No, forget about it. And that is the method of comparison. The method of comparing. Now there is this whole lot of business that I also spent a lot of time reading. This philosophy East-West is a part of that comparative business. And then they make a life out of that comparison between East and West. And then we have Professor Dayakrishna making a big issue about what is comparative philosophy comparing. But, another scandalous thing is Dayakrishna never refers to a biggest dada, bop of all comparisons, Gaudapada. Okay, Dayakrishna begins as thinks that comparison began with Muirhead or Orientalists. This is our tragedy. This is our tragedy. And these are the people who have made sure that, screens are, spread so that you don't see what is there in the other side. Okay, Dayakrishna is not some Karl Popper, some George Bush or somebody. Okay, he is from India, he knows what are the texts and all. Okay, and Gaudapada is a person who wrote this fascinating book called the Mandukya Karika. And in this Mandukya Karika, he does something fascinating. And what is it? He compares not two similar things. He undertakes the indomitable exercise of comparing two incompatible schools. And what are they? Vedanta and Buddhism. Historically, Buddhism came to attack everything in Vedanta. So there is a mutual exclusion between Buddhism and Vedanta. It's almost like squaring circle. One is a square, the other one is a circle. And the job that Gaudapada takes on himself is to square the circle. Okay? He builds a beautiful bridge between these two incompatible things. It is, globally fascinating. It is globally fascinating. And tell you, I'm not saying that, you should read these people because you are Indians and things like that. You should read it because, you are a global, for a global people. And I'm not trying to boast myself. I make my living in my research, publishing, selling the Moonfallis of Badarayana, Upanishads and Gaudapada, and I'm doing not very badly. Okay. So there is a lot of demand for it. In addition to all this online, I am an online Amazon for these people, So if you have any things, and I don't charge any money. This is free. This is free. Okay. I am an Amazon for Amazon.com for Badarayana, then this kind of things. So he does something fascinating. And I cannot tell you how exciting reading him. But then there is something which comes as a shock to me. Now, since I don't have time, I don't want to tell you, various other details, except to say, leave you with this feeling that Badarayana or Gaudapada is a master comparativist. The world has produced. Okay, if you wanted to do any comparative work in any branch, including our day-to-day life, in day-to-day life we compare. I compare my dress with somebody's dress, my food with somebody's food, my salary with somebody's words, my glory with another person. Read Gaudapada. Okay, and you will learn a lot of things. Even if you are not a student of philosophy, read, because he is the master who will tell you different shades of comparison, which is useful. In fact, I survive in in this academics because of the insights from Gaudapada. Okay, so if you and then when Gaudapada was trying to make comparison by building a bridge between Buddhism and Hindu Vedanta, there are three people who come to make the following claim. One of them is Shankaracharya. So what is the job that was undertaken by Gaudapada? The job of building a bridge so that there is a comparison possible between two incompatible domains. And then you have Shankaracharya, a student of Rabindranath Tagore. He comes and says, no, but Gaudapada is a Buddhist, which means he's trying to pull him this side. So what is Gaudapada doing? He wants to reach to the other side. Okay? Whereas he says, no, you can't go the other side, just come this side. This is Shankaracharya. That is not connect, that is not fully finished. There is Damodar Karmarkar and T. M.P. Mahadevan, who claim, no, he is a Vedanti. You understand what could be the predicament of Gaudapada? When he is trying to make a bridge between Hinduism and Buddhism, you are trying to pull him this side or that side. Okay? That is shocking to me, because it is this ideological preoccupation that did not allow these people to pay attention to the cognitive philosophical work undertaken by these great philosophers. Okay, so when you are approaching a philosopher, it is not that I don't have ideology. I have ideology. I have my own views. But you should first try to see as much as you can. What is the purpose? What is the location of the thinker whom you are studying? If you go with your preconceived notions, you will come back with your preconceived notions, and that is not worth wasting your time. That's not worth wasting your time. Now, somebody can ask, is it possible to study people without a bias? Without a bias? My answer is, it is not easy. It is not easy, but it is not impossible either. It is not easy, but it is not impossible either. Studying these people, setting aside your ideology, you can bring your ideology later, but you don't begin with your ideology to begin with. Then you will not get that fellow. Okay, it is possible. It is not easy, but it is not impossible. It is not impossible like if you ask a civil engineer to make a bridge over a flowing river. Will the civil engineer tell you, first you drain the water, I will make the bridge, and then you can release it? Why not? How can you make a bridge in a flowing water? Okay, he and she will still make a bridge on a flowing water. Okay, it is not easy, but it's not impossible either. That is, reading these people without a preconceived notion is not that easy, but it is not impossible either. Okay, those like Shankaracharya and Damodar Karmarkar or T.M.P. Mahadevan are like civil engineers who would ask the owner, who asked them to construct a bridge, first drain the water, then I will make a bridge, and then you can release the water. But you have to be a civil engineer of a different type, where you will undertake this very difficult job of making a bridge on a flowing river by diverting, making ducts, this, that, and the other. Okay, and that is the job of philosophy. And India today is poised in a very crucial juncture. You know why crucial juncture? We have the advantage of technology. We also have a lot of resources that are not explored as it is in the case of the West. In the West, books are getting recycled. Anthologies, editions, critical editions, and things like that. So new ideas are not coming. They're only recycling because they have 24/7 publishing houses which have to sell, and you all will buy those books. 60% of what is written in India is not even printed once. 30% of what is printed is not even available. I'm not saying that everything that is written here is great, but this is a terrain which opens a lot of vistas for young people like you to explore and make a mark, not at a local or national level, make a mark at an international level. So with that, I thank Balaganapati and Jairu for taking this risk of asking me to, to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your words of wisdom. And now I would like to invite Nidhi ma'am to deliver a formal vote of thanks to you.
Thank you, Dr. Zeronisha ma'am. Before that, are there any questions which the participants would like to pose to Professor Raghuram Raju? Then probably
Sir,
we
do
can.
you have time to
No, I have
answer?
to.
Because as you have mentioned.
Yeah, because my student is defending her comprehensive examination. So they said, I have to join by 3 o'clock. But tomorrow, I'm.
All right. All right.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, tomorrow we'll have a half-an-hour discussion session where if you have any questions, those will be addressed by Professor Raghuram Raju tomorrow. Right? Thank you so much, sir, for joining.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Raghuram Raju, for sparing your time and coming over here and delivering such an engrossing and enlightening lecture. If we see in the chat box, and the participants would be very appreciative of your lecture, sir. So thank you so much. And we will see you soon tomorrow, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. I'm extremely sorry for leaving you like this, but there's something which I couldn't avoid. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
So, Bala sir, do we have some discussion on Indian philosophy? Because Priyankar sir will be joining us shortly.
Friends, yeah, thank you, Dr. Zairu and Dr. Nidhi as well. Friends, basically, I wanted to introduce Professor Raghu before he begins his talk. But I don't want to stop his 1 hour time that he had. He had only 1 hour time with us. And I don't want to encroach into his time and tell you this. See, you heard him talking, right? Excellent teacher and wonderful scholar. And in fact, I must mention this, that he is the only Indian philosopher from India who has been continuously publishing, like last 10 books that he has published from Routledge and Oxford. They're all like now reached a stage of reference and textbooks at various universities and philosophy departments. And we are very fortunate to have him with us and get to know the kind of knowledge that he has gained. He processes it so well and gives it to others in such a lucid way. That is the greatness of Professor Raghu. I've been his student. I have done my, he taught me during masters, and I have done my PhD with him. So that's why I feel like others also should get benefited of his kind of talk. Though he's touching a very tough area, this is a faculty development program, and we are supposed to talk about teaching methodologies and research methodologies as well. So there are two things that each one of you to, I request each one of you to have a look at. Okay, one is how a scholar is coming forward and presenting to us. And this is with regard to the sources related to teaching methodologies. The second aspect is the content that is being presented, which is a part of research methodology, right? So whenever you come across a scholar, while listening to the scholars who would be presenting before you, you try to look at both the aspects and try to assess yourself, because here we are not, I think nobody should assess us, right? We should assess ourselves. So if somebody else assesses, then immediately we take an offensive stand and say that, no, who are you to assess me, right? So I agree with this kind of self-respect that we have. Probably it may be falsely footed, but still we have this self-respect. I respect that. But even then I would say, please assess yourself continuously and see how lucidly he has presented whatever he wants to do. He has, though he did not specifically, as we talk about methodology 1, methodology 2, and methodology 3, this kind of discussion may not be there in most of the talks. Okay, so don't expect such kind of thing. That would be there in some of the talks, but not in all of them. But otherwise, what you would find in such kind of talks is their own methodology comes into picture, and their own teaching methodology comes into picture, their own research methodology that comes into picture, because all of them have a rich years of experience with them, with which they process and then present to us in a way we can really enjoy it. No, because to talk about, to make one statement about Gaudapada or Badarayana, you have to spend hours reading what is written on them and what they have written, what they have compiled, right? You cannot just make a statement, a sweeping statement, sweeping generalization. So that's why I'm saying rich knowledge which is being processed and presented to us. And in this process, in fact, what he was talking to us is how do we look at this? There is a fashion, no? These days, everybody says, I'm doing Indian philosophy. I'm surprised actually. When I was a student, some people thought only doing Western philosophy is doing doing philosophy, and doing Indian philosophy is nonsense, okay? Or it doesn't have any much palatability at all. But the same old scholars who have argued like that when I was a student have turned to Indian philosophy and started writing about Vivekananda and so many other things. I was quite surprised, somebody who is established himself in Wittgensteinian philosophy and has now turned into a Vivekananda philosopher. Right? So I'm saying it has become a fashion as well, doing Indian philosophy and looking at classical Indian philosophy. But if you're a serious researcher, how do you look at it is very important. So that's what comes out clearly in the talk by Professor Raghuram Raju. Okay, looking at locating the philosophers and looking at their methodology. Okay, in general, talking about Upanishads, everybody does that, and you can have hundreds and thousands of books that have come on Upanishads explaining what is there as the content. But most of them, or all of them, in fact, try to devote themselves to what is being repeated again and again in terms of the relation between Brahman and Atman, etc., etc. But what Raghu was looking at is, as he says, not what was spoken. So he shifts his concentration from the content to the other formative kind of things. And that's how he gives a different shift to the orientation that one can have. He's not saying that all of us should have this kind of approach, but can have a different kind of approach towards the same text by looking at who is speaking and what is the nature of philosophizing that existed during that time. So this is a kind of different paradigm shift that he is trying to bring in the discussions on classical Indian philosophy by telling us, informing us, what kind of compilations, compiler. We think that compiling is a very easy job and you can bring here and there things and put them together. But Badarayana's compilation is not that kind of a compilation. We do talk about Vedas, but we don't give much importance to Badarayana, who has compiled the Vedas and who has authored Brahma Sutras. So that is very important. That's where he is trying to focus. And as he rightly pointed out, interpreters were given more prominence in Indian tradition than the original text and the author, compiler himself. Because we all know about Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, Ramanuja's Visishta Advaita Vedanta, and Madhva's Dvaita Vedanta, and other Vedantic schools. But nobody, even if you want to study, nobody will teach you Brahma Sutras directly. They will teach you Brahma Sutras interpretation of Shankara, or through the interpretation of Shankara, or through the interpretation of Ramanuja. That is the interesting thing that he is trying to point out. And the other important point that he has presented to us is the very act of interpretation by Gaudapada. So these are inquiry, compilation, and interpretation. Okay, comparison. So these are the three things, three methodologies that existed in classical Indian philosophy, which he has presented to us. Okay, the first one is inquiry, and then compilation and comparison. How these were done, and how these were done in such a way that we can, while looking at reading Western philosophy, if we look back at our own tradition, we can find more insights and deeper insights than that. And that's why he says why should you read Indian philosophy? Why should you look at Indian tradition? Here, Indian philosophy doesn't mean only philosophy. Indian tradition, basically. That's what I mean. So why should you read Indian tradition? Because it has much deeper resources for us to get benefited of, which unfortunately we may be ignoring. That is the point that is presented. And the methods that come forward is a comparative method that he talks about in the classical tradition, by looking at classical tradition, and also what is the method you should adopt to draw the traditional knowledge into the contemporary times. And of course, he talks about the analytical methodology as well. And yeah, these are certain things that he has brought out to us. And he is he sometimes tries to provoke us. Intentionally, he tries to provoke so that we can start reacting and engaging with him. Because of his other preoccupation, he could not continue with us, but he would be there with us tomorrow for 1.5 hours. Probably, if you have any questions, please note them down so that you can pose those questions to him tomorrow. He will speak for 1 hour, and then half an hour we can have a complete discussion with him with regard to today's talk as well as tomorrow's talk. Now, coming back to how I wanted to say, present him before his talk is this. See, we are looking at philosophical methodologies in higher education, right? Now, after listening to him, you may ask me, like, how is this related to this, the title that you have given me? See, and also yesterday I have given the explanation that philosophical methodologies in various groupings that we have done, we'll have lectures on that. But how is Raghu's talk related to that? See, basically, one of the other fundamental things that I have included is looking at philosophical methodologies themselves. Okay, so that's where Dr. Raghu would give, Professor Raghu is going to give 2 lectures. Today's lecture is on Indian tradition, and tomorrow's lecture would be on Western tradition. Okay, so when we talk about philosophical methods, as I said, I don't mean to say like already stereotyped kind of methodologies and whatever we mention in terms of 1, 2, 3 kind of ones. Okay, so what I'm trying to present is while if you look at each of the texts, each text presents a methodology, and each author, each philosopher, each reader, each scholar who is reading the text comes out with a different kind of understanding of methodology or different methodology that is expressed and exhibited and imbibed in the text itself, which is to be explored. Okay, so that is how you may call it with the same name, analytical method or synthetic method or rationalist method or empiricist method, but they are not the same ones in 2 different texts, and they are not in the similar way that 2 authors have used in their work. So that's what comes out very interestingly when it comes to each of these lectures. So that is how exploring into the text and looking at and bringing out varieties of the same method that you're talking about. For instance, Professor Raghu was mentioning to us that though we talk about comparison in general, but the comparison in general that is done and comparison that is done that was taken up by Gaudapada are different kind of ones, right? So that is how there would be different shades and different ways of the same method that comes up. That's why we thought we should look at these methodologies. We should request the senior scholars to look at their own work and look at their own way of understanding the methodology in the work that they are doing. So this is what is the interesting exercise that they have done for us basically. So these methods, when we look at these methods, there are certain binaries that come up. Okay, I want basically all of you to react and reflect on these. Okay? Whatever may be the method, there are certain binaries that come in front of us. One is how far a method is flexible. Okay, if you want to call something to be a comparative method, so what is the elasticity of the method? How far it should be flexible and how far it should be rigid. So rigidity and flexibility of the method is one very important and fascinating thing that we have to grapple with. If you want to be a researcher, then you have to while writing your work, you have to look at this particular aspect. How if I'm using this method, and yeah, first thing is what is the method that I'm using, and if I decide that I'm using this method, then how flexible and how rigid is this method? Okay, I'm saying this because in speculative methodologies, I'm now making a distinction between speculative methodologies and empirical methodologies. Okay, and in speculative methodologies, the elasticity is more. The elasticity is more. When it comes to empirical methodologies, the elasticity is not so much. Okay, you will not have that much width as you find in speculative methodologies. And basically, philosophical methodologies would be a kind of speculative methodologies. So the binary that we find by using a methodology is in terms of its rigidity and flexibility. Okay, this is number one. The second one is how open it should be. Okay, if you're using the method, whether this method is open for other disciplines also to use it, and how closed it is. So the openness and closedness of a method is another interesting aspect that we have to look at closely and carefully before we make use of this method. Okay, so that the second important binary that comes up is openness versus closedness. Okay, along with this, the third one is how wide and how narrow. Okay, a method helps us to reach out to the conclusions that we are trying to handle. We pick up a problem and then we deal with the problem. And while dealing with the problem and presenting the problem, we pick up a method. And how do we do that, and how wide it is and how narrow it is also very important. These are the binaries that come up before us, which in fact make the process of using the method very interesting. If there is no binary of this kind or this sort here there, then the method would become useless. Like you cannot use a spanner or kind of one in research methodologies. It should not be so rigid like that. There should be some flexibility as well as there should be some rigidity as well. So the gap between this flexibility and rigidity, openness and closeness, and wideness and narrowness is the one which makes the use of the method very interesting. That's why, though I have constructed these binaries, it is beyond and between the binaries is what makes a methodology very interesting and very useful to the person who is a researcher. So a researcher, in fact, while looking at these methodologies, tries to understand these binaries, and the bit in between and beyond the binaries is the one which makes the use of the method very interesting and useful to the researcher, which is to be grasped by us. So that's what prompts us in handling the method in a better way, or handling the problem at hand by using the methodologies in a better way. So these are certain thoughts that I got while listening to Professor Raghu. So I thought I should share them with you, and that is where basically Professor Raghu's methodologies today, Indian perspective, and tomorrow he would be talking about Western perspective as well. And you don't find these kind of methodologies anywhere in the textbook written saying that this is the method, right? So these are the things that they have developed over a period of time and used them in their works, and then presenting them to us. That's their humbleness and greatness in providing such kind of knowledge to us. So this is what I have to say. If you have any general concerns, but otherwise, friends, I also thought, I don't know how relevant this would be, because I have done this last year as well during the other teaching methodology faculty development program that I have organized. Some of you may find this is very childish kind of one, but still, we are all teachers in the sense that we have to be a child as well, right? See, if you disown the student in you, you cannot be a teacher. You cannot continue to be a teacher. That's why, especially in the context of a faculty development program, there are certain questions that we have to frequently pose to ourselves. And that is why, in fact, if you have applied for any career advancement or any position anywhere, superior position above what you are at presently, then you have to fill up an application form, right? If you are filling up this application form, new trend, at least which has emerged before, say, 10, 20 years back, is assessment, right? And it's not just assessment, it is self-assessment as well. Do we assess ourselves is very important, and that's where this faculty development program is also very important. So in that particular sense, I thought I keep asking this question. That's why I want you also to think about this question, like just please ask yourself how satisfied you are as a teacher. Okay, how satisfied you are as a teacher. This question is very important, because if you, unless something shakes you, not externally but internally, you will not make an attempt to go further, move forward. So that's why you don't have to answer anybody, but you answer to yourself. But please ask this question to yourself: how satisfied you are as a teacher? Because we have chosen this profession and we are into teaching, which means we have the responsibility as well. And the responsibility that we hold is huge, in the sense that at least 6, 7 generations, right? 5 generations, 3 generations, 4 generations of students would be going going out from us, and we will be interacting with them. And in this particular regard, we have a huge responsibility. And in order to realize that responsibility, please ask this question as frequently as possible: how satisfied you are as a teacher? And this answer, no, you should not give same answer every day. Ask this question and pose the same answer and say that close the file. Please don't do that, and start reflecting on it. Because if you think philosophy is important, and if you think philosophy plays a key role, philosophy plays a key role in the sense of developing self-reflectivity. So even if you claim to be a great philosophy professor, and if you haven't reflected on yourself, then it's over. You are not a philosopher. You don't fit to be into the profession at all. So this self-reflectivity is the one which pushes us further, and this is very important. And that's where the question of how satisfied you are as a teacher is very important. And if you can cite certain, if while going to sleep, if you can write about it whenever you find time, please do that. And this exercise helps all of us. Okay, it's not that it is only for the younger teachers, and I am an experienced person and I am a university professor, I am in Delhi University, I don't have to write that. Even I write that. Okay, I try to see how satisfied I am at the end of the day, at least in once in a month. So please, this really helps us. And that's why this is also a methodology. If you want to improve yourself, this is also one of the methodologies that is very important. So I request all of you to reflect on that. Dr. Zairu, do we have? Yeah, I see.
I just spoke to Priyankar sir. Hello sir, I just spoke to Priyankar sir. He will be joining us shortly by 3:35 or something like that. He will be with us.
I see very well-respected.
We can ask some question to our participant in between if they want, if they have any doubts and clarification from you regarding these methodologies in Indian philosophy.
Yeah, sure. No, I was only welcoming Professor Asha Mukherjee.
Yeah, Asha Mukherjee ma'am is here. She is listening to you.
Yeah. So, Dr. Jayanti, you have raised your hand in between, but I didn't want to stop Professor Raghu, because that 1 hour time completely should be given to him. No? Yeah, please.
So should I unmute Jayanti ma'am?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, good evening, good afternoon. Sir, it was really a very extremely beneficial lecture by Professor Raghuram Rajan. And it is a kind of new perspective for reading the text, basically Upanishadic text and other Indian philosophy text also. And in this area, just I have a request that you can also help us, like having more such programs like text and interpretation. There are problems within the Indian philosophy. Many problems are there, and in the sense that we don't teach Badrayan, and we straight away we teach Brahma Sutra Vasya and Gaudapada text. We don't teach also that. So if we frequently change the text semester wise, maybe we'll acquainted with few texts, few more texts, not repeatedly we are teaching Vedant Paribhasa and some of the text, limited text, and we don't have knowledge. And I like your, like when you said that flexibility and rigidity and in the research, there is a problem I face that once we become flexible to take method into account, suppose take for the example, if I go by reading the Upanishad, and maybe there are various ways of reading the text, but if I make it flexible, and there is a problem of understanding the text will arise. That is what my problem is. Maybe I'm wrong, but see, that is a problem which the religious issue, when we address also, there is a problem how flexible a religion can be. And if we allow the flexibility, then there is a danger which the text might face, that we may lose the authenticity and the authoritativeness which the language claim, and the deeper analysis or understanding of the text, which will create some problem. That is what my first understanding of flexibility. And yes, we can widen our area, but when we talk about, suppose we talk about Vedant philosophy or Upanishadic philosophy, we can have a kind of broader perspective, but that broader perspective not necessarily a flexibility, but within the domain of rigidity, acceptance for the more people, and more ideological acceptance. For that reason, we are widening our discourse, but that is not a kind of what I can say, that is not a kind of flexible, maybe flexible, but again we are establishing rigidity within the flexibility. So that is some of the thing which I face, the problem while reading the text. There are flexibilities there. If we take Nagarjuna's model, and then accepting all the ideology together and have a global outlook, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So that can be a model, or Upanishadic Brahman can be a model. But again, flexibility is a problem for me in understanding the text. See, we do that, but that flexibility again within the domain of rigidity.
Yeah, I understood.
Thank you.
Got your point. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, basically, exactly the same thing that I was also mentioning, that we do think in terms of rigidity and flexibility, wideness, openness and closeness, wideness and narrowness with regard to the methodologies. But what is important as a researcher for each one of us is to look at the space in between. Okay, in between the rigidity and flexibility, in between the openness and closeness, in between the wideness and the narrowness, because in fact our play is in between, not completely staying with one of these binaries. As a researcher, we should be open to play in between. And in this regard, friends, I must mention this. In fact, if you look at the Western philosophy, initially, like if you look at Aristotle, etc., you would find a law of excluded middle with reference to loss of thought, how your thought is governed by certain laws. One of them you find is law of excluded middle, which means it has to be either true or false, and there is no middle ground at all. Right? This is the kind of binary position that comes up clearly, articulation of the binary position. But if you look at the classical Indian tradition, you don't find or you find exceptions to this binary position at many places. For example, I'll give you an example of Buddhism. Buddhism talks about Madhya Marga. It says you have to avoid the binaries and you have to explore the middle path. And look at Jainism. Jainism talks about Anekantavada. It says there are no two perspectives. There are multiple perspectives that are possible, and each one of them may be, to some extent, limited extent, correct. So you would find the middle path, and also you would find the pluralistic possibilities. And along with this, you would find Advaita Vedanta, which talks about you cannot describe it, anirvachaniya. You cannot say this is this exactly, because there is a kind of indeterminism that is existent in deciding about them. So what you find when you look at classical Indian tradition is beyond the binaries, varieties of things that are coming up with reference to epistemology. Specifically, I'm referring to epistemology, and we have a wonderful domain there. So that's why, Dr. Jayanti, what I was actually referring to is the domain in between, where the researcher is free and plays a very key role in doing whatever he wants to or she wants to do. Yeah, thank you. If there are any other concerns or any of you have, then.
Participants can raise their hand if they have any question.
So in that case,
okay.
Yeah, Dr. Okay.
Kishan Panda, I'm unmuting, sir. Yes, Kishan ji, you can have your question.
Namaste to one and all. Namaste to Bal Ganpati sir, Zairu ma'am, and actually, I would first.
Oh, voice is very low.
Actually, sir, I would first introduce myself. My name is Krishna Panda. I am a lecturer of Swaminarayan Vedant. I have done Acharya in Swaminarayan Vedant from Sri Somnath Sanskrit University. I am also a lecturer in one of the colleges which is affiliated with Somnath University. Sir, I have actually studied at Tirupati, which sir described there are two universities. I wanted to ask the question there itself. Sir, why should we read Upanishads today? This was a very relevant question which was asked by Raghu Ram sir, and by this he started his discussion. I liked this thing very much, and he said there are parallels between Greek philosophy and the Upanishads. He told many parallels. I could not write it, but can I get some information about that in some PDF or or in some way that I wanted to ask there?
Yeah,
And there were many other questions.
You can ask
also.
me the references tomorrow, because in some of his books he has discussed these details, but I don't remember the book, what book it is. He may suggest you that. And the second thing is, you can always watch the video of this program again and again.
Yes, sir. We have already shared the link on a group, and they can access. And we have a Ramanujan College YouTube channel as well. I would suggest everybody to subscribe. All videos, everything is available there.
सर, इन्होंने कहा कि ब्रह्म सूत्र को बादरायण जी ने जो लिखा था वो हम नहीं पढ़ते या तो कोई नहीं पढ़ाते. सर, मैंने भी ब्रह्म सूत्र भाष्य पढ़ा है, मेरे आचार्य कक्षा में था 4 सेमेस्टर में. मैं इसके बारे में कहना चाहता हूँ कि सर, ब्रह्म सूत्र का जो भाष्य है ना, वो सूत्र के अर्थ में वृद्धि करता है. जैसे कि एक सूत्र है, ब्रह्म सूत्र का नहीं है, लेकिन एक ऐसा एग्जाम्पल है, साहित्य में दिया जाता है कि गतो अस्तम अर्कः. गतः मतलब कि हो गया है, अस्त मतलब सनसेट हो गया, और अर्क मतलब सन. द सन हैज सेट, शाम हो गई है, गतो अस्तम अर्क. अभी कोई चोर है, उसने सिर्फ इतना सुना के गतो अस्तम अर्क, तो वो क्या सोचेगा, चलो भाई चोरी करने का टाइम हो गया, शाम हो गया. कोई पुजारी है मंदिर का, तो उसने सुना गतो अस्तम अर्क मतलब चलो अभी संध्या वंदन करने का टाइम हो गया, आरती करने का टाइम हो गया. और ऐसा भी आता है कि एक अभिसारिका अर्थात प्रेमिका, उसने सुना कि गतोस्तमर्क, चलो अभी प्रेमिका मिलने का टाइम हो गया। तो एक ही शब्द है गतोस्तमर्क, लेकिन उसके इंटरप्रिटेशंस अलग अलग लोग अपने अपने हिसाब से करते हैं। वैसे ही जो ब्रह्म सूत्र है वो इतने शॉर्ट है कि उसका एक्सटेंशन कोई भी कितने भी अच्छे तरीके से अपने हिसाब से कर सकता है, और वही अलग अलग संप्रदाय के आचार्यों ने किया है। शंकराचार्य, रामानुजाचार्य, मध्वाचार्य, निम्बार्काचार्य, शुद्धाद्वैत वेदांत के वल्लभाचार्य, फिर अचिंत्य भेदा भेद में बलदेव विद्याभूषण, इन्होंने किया है। और मैं स्वामीनारायण संप्रदाय का फॉलोअर हूँ सर। दिल्ली में आपने अक्षरधाम देखा होगा, उसी का मैं फॉलोअर हूँ। वहाँ के स्वामी भद्रेश दास जी ने अभी नूतन भाष्य लिखा है, स्वामीनारायण भाष्य, गीता, उपनिषद और ब्रह्मसूत्र प्रस्थानत्रय के ऊपर। तो उसी को मैं पढ़ता हूँ, पढ़ाता हूँ सर। तो जैसे कि सर हम देख रहे हैं कि जो फर्स्ट कंपाइलर की बात की व्यास जी, तो व्यास जी भगवान के 24 अवतारों में भी एक माने जाते हैं। तो अवतारों की जो बुद्धि क्षमता है या तो समझने की क्षमता है स्पिरिचुअल टेक्स्ट को, आध्यात्मिक ज्ञान को, वो काफी ज्यादा होता है। तो उनकी बात बहुत ही गूढ़ होने से और युग के परिवर्तन के चलते, जैसे जैसे युग का परिवर्तन होता जाता है वैसे मनुष्य की बुद्धि में भी ह्रास होता जाता है, डिक्रीज होता जाता है। तो मनुष्य को फॉर मासेस वो कैसे समझाएं, तो उसके लिए ये जो ज्ञान परंपरा है, तो पहले से, जैसे कि गीता के 4थे अध्याय में भी श्री कृष्ण भगवान ने कहा है कि सबसे पहले ये जो आध्यात्मिक ज्ञान है मैंने इनको दिया था, सूर्य देव को दिया था, फिर सूर्य देव ने और उनके शिष्य को दिया, फिर उन्होंने शिष्य को दिया, ऐसे ऐसे करते करते इससे ये एक बात भी पता चलती है कि कई सालों से, अनादिकाल से ये जो स्पिरिचुअल ज्ञान है ये अलग अलग व्यक्तियों द्वारा ये कंटिन्यूअस तो रहा है। ये चीज भी अच्छी बात है। और वेद के सर, वेद के ऊपर भी सायणाचार्य ने, उव्वट ने और महिधर ने भी भाष्य लिखा है। इनफैक्ट स्वामी दयानंद सरस्वती जी ने भी भाष्य इस वजह से ही लिखा है, यद्यपि यजुर्वेद के ऊपर ही लिखा है, सारे वेद के ऊपर नहीं लिख सके। लेकिन इसका अर्थ ये है कि वो अपने हिसाब से अपने ज्ञान के अनुकूल लोगों को सिखाने के लिए ही ये ज्ञान को देना चाहते हैं, डिसेमिनेट करना चाहते हैं। वेद और उपनिषद के जो लैंग्वेज है वो भी बहुत पुराने जमाने का है, जो आज के परिप्रेक्ष्य में लोग उस भाषा को नहीं समझ पाते, लोग उस मेंटालिटी के नहीं है।
Yeah, I got your point.
सर इसीलिए वेद के भाष्यकार और उपनिषद के भाष्यकार, ब्रह्मसूत्र के भाष्यकार की जरूरत पड़ती है। और ये इसी का भी एक ज्ञान परंपरा कंटिन्यूस है, इसका भी ये परिचय है। जैसे कि मैं एक एग्जांपल दे रहा हूँ सर, छांदोग्य
Kishan ji,
उपनिषद।
make yourself little bit brief because we have some other participant to ask question.
बस एक ही मैं
Yes,
प्रश्न पूछ रहा हूँ।
sure.
तो छांदोग्य 6:1 में लिखा है कि सदैव सौम्य इदम अग्र आसीत, और तैत्तिरीय 2:7:1 में लिखा है असद्वा इदम अग्र आसीत। तो दोनों को बैलेंस कैसे करना है, क्योंकि एक में लिखा है कि सत में से उत्पत्ति हुई जगत की, दूसरे में कहा है कि असत में से उत्पत्ति कैसे हुई। तो हियर द रोल ऑफ द भाष्यकार कम्स टू प्ले।
Yeah, I do agree with you, Dr. Krishna. In fact, you can pose this question tomorrow. I welcome
Thank you, sir.
Priyanka Upadhyay ji for.
So,
can you hear,
are we? Yeah, I can see Priyankar sir.
I think his audio is still getting connected, but I'll get back to you, Dr. Krishna, later on. Okay, sorry.
Okay, just a second, sir. Let me make him co-host. Yeah, sure, sir. I'm just doing it. Done.
Good afternoon, sir.
Very good afternoon.
Namaskar. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm trying to fix these airports because life becomes easy. You can't depend. Just give me a sec.
No problem.
So normally it should. No issues. I can live without it. All modern things. Okay.
So, Priyankar sir,
can we start?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I must warn you.
Priyankar sir, are you ready for it?
Well, I'm always ready. There's hardly any readiness from one meeting to another, and so no issues. We can I thought my time was 3:40, so I thought I should report to you 5 minutes before that. So I'm okay.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, sir.
You
So
are on time, actually. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and joining us. And I think Dr. Nidhi, please take the
Yes,
proceedings.
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, I'm here. So a very good afternoon to our eminent resource person for today, Professor Priyankar Upadhyay, and to all the participants. We welcome you to the afternoon session of the second day of the 1-week online faculty development program on philosophical methodologies in higher education, research and teaching. So today we have with us Professor Priyankar Upadhyay, and sir will be delivering a lecture on philosophical methodologies in peace and conflict studies. But before I invite you, sir, to begin with your session, I would like to take this privilege to introduce you to the participants here. So Professor Priyankar Upadhyay has served Banaras Hindu University for over four decades in different teaching and research positions. Most remarkable has been his foundational contribution to envision and nurture the Malaviya Center for Peace Research at BHU. He currently holds the UNESCO Chair for Peace and Intercultural Understanding and serves on the UNESCO Executive Committee of Interreligious Dialogue and Intercultural Understanding. He is on the governing body of Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Institute of Asian Studies, and Presidency University in Kolkata. Professor Upadhyay also holds the prestigious Global Fellowship of the Peace Research Institute, Oslo. The JNU has recently designated him for the prestigious Rajiv Gandhi Chair for Peace and Disarmament. He is a recipient of many prestigious awards and fellowships. Professor Upadhyay has served as a visiting professor as well as senior fellow at various universities abroad. He also lectures at the Foreign Service Institute and National Defense College in India and serves as a subject expert in Star News, BBC, and Sahara. Professor Upadhyay has led several transnational research projects and has led several MOU-based institutional collaborations with foreign universities. He has published in journals and books from Oxford University Press, Manchester University Press, Cambridge University Press, Sage, Ashgate, and Rowledge. He also serves on the editorial board of the Irish Journal of International Affairs, Dublin City University, and Journal of Peace and Conflict, UN University of Peace, Costa Rica. The Teaching Learning Center at Ramanujan College is very grateful to you, sir, for sparing your time and coming over here to deliver a lecture. I now request you, sir, to preside over the session. Over to you, Professor Upadhyay.
Thank you so much, Nidhi and Nisha and all of you there, or all of us here now, that in peace research we say that there are no binaries. There is nothing like I and you. We are all together. Ubuntu is a new ethos African proverb. You might have been hearing lately about it, which basically means that we are all part of the same tree. So welcome to each one of you. And so this particular sort of time together, I would like to share with you some of the issues that have confronted me, that I have kind of often faced and questioned and tried to find answers regarding the ontology of social sciences, and where does this peace and conflict studies, for instance, is located, and then in turn the relationship between different methodologies, and now that the focus here today is on the philosophical trajectories, philosophical methodologies in social sciences, I thought I'll pick up the specific discipline, sub-discipline, whatever you call it, of peace and conflict studies. Many of you actually might not, sorry about this, might not have reckoned with the rise and growth of peace and conflict studies as a discipline or subdiscipline. But let me remind you that in Delhi University also, now at least after many years of struggle, many colleges and the university as such has this paper, Peace and Conflict Studies, as one of the auxiliary papers. And but then Peace and Conflict Studies has emerged as a discipline, as a hub of, as a window of studies in many parts of world, and also in India. Like for instance, my own university, Banaras Hindu University, has set up an independent interdisciplinary center for peace research known as Malaviya Center for Peace Research. And of course, Jamia Millia Islamia also has a Nelson Mandela Center for Peace, Conflict, Transformation, and so on and so forth. A lot of universities have these. So like then, when it came to this particular offer, I thought that it will serve me double purpose to explore my own understanding of how philosophy actually mediates into this business of peace and conflict studies, and also probably to introduce many of you to this burgeoning discipline of peace and conflict studies, to interest you and to tell you that many of you might just find a great future, a great learning opportunity in this upcoming area. And perhaps today I can say very, very relevant area, very sort of an area that's so crucial to human survival today. We may not face it every day, like COVID is chasing us, but more than anything, our survival, the humanity's survival actually hinges on how soon we realize that we live in a very dangerous world in terms of the never close possibilities of nuclear disarmament and nuclear warfare. I mean, one silly mistake and you don't need no vaccine can help us. Today, just to repeat something obvious, sometimes you need to repeat things obvious to stress a point that the world as a whole has over 15,000 nuclear armed warheads, and which are ready to go in 5 to 7 minutes, 3 minutes sometimes. And the situation world over is very grim, but that's just the international aspect. Within the nation states also, we have violence and violent engagements at community level, at family level, and at all walks of life. So in short, before we really try to interface philosophy and where does philosophy work in this, let me say that this is a very upcoming discipline, which simply is not about international relations, but it's about everyday life, the routine violence, as sometimes we call it. So, so that's the idea. Now, this peace and conflict studies actually is a, how could I say, is a cluster of different disciplines. For instance, which focus on peace and conflict. As you know that whenever we talk about peace, we have in mind a threat, a conflict, or a war-like situation. So I wouldn't say they are connected umbilically, but peace and conflict, they go hand in hand, and it's not necessary. And that's also one of those constructions that has come to us in course of our learnings, that when we think peace only in terms of conflict, and in many cultures, and we'll talk about it, and that is not the case. So peace studies, peace research, peace sciences, some people call it. And then along with that, we have these trajectories of conflict resolution, conflict management, conflict transformation. Somewhere is an idea that managing conflict before they go out of hand or diffusing conflict, they are very essential to human survival and therefore this discipline. So now when I took it as a kind of personal challenge to see everything from the point of view of philosophy. And the reason I have talked a little bit, I have prefaced my these few minutes of speaking to you with a little description of peace and conflict studies is to tell you that it's an attempt to bring ideas, utopias, philosophies together with an action-oriented understanding, an action-oriented plan. Because just because everybody talks about peace, or our ancestors talked about peace, the Greeks talked about peace, everybody talked about peace. In fact, probably on the face of it, people are surprised when they come to realize that Thomas Hobbes, who's generally seen to be in the same line of Machiavelli and Kautilya, although these comparisons are very odious, he is rated to be one of the great contributor to the peace science, or he's studied as a peace thinker also. So, the point is that who is it that who does in the world, which philosophy doesn't approve of peace, but what kind of peace, how to attain that peace, what are the means? Is it in a Gandhian manner, as we say, that peace, there is no way to peace, and peace is the way. Now, it's another thing whether Gandhi said it or not, but now this is attributed to Gandhi, and I think we can use it in that sense of the term as well. So this bringing together of knowledge of human society, cosmos, philosophical insights into action is what constitutes this particular gamut of disciplines known as peace and conflict studies. The difficulty arises at the outset itself. And I think many of you, especially, you have heard such wonderful speakers, and you will be hearing many more. It's the construction of the concepts that we talk about. How do we reckon with, how do we construe these different concepts of peace and conflict? I think that is a challenge that we are faced up when we try to bring in these two different kind of platforms together, like the philosophical methodologies in social sciences, for instance, in peace and conflict research. And the reason I'm saying is that, for example, if we look at the very concept of peace itself, and it is very, at the outset, it's very clear for anybody to realize that peace is very difficult to define. I mean, on the face of it, the common man's or the most disseminated definition of peace is the absence of war, and that's how it has been defined. But that also is now a lot of people criticize it, and it has been rejected as a definition. But there is an emphasis. There is a kind of insistence that conflict or violence is a constant state of affairs, and peace is an exception. So that's how we define peace, as the absence of war, or peace as the absence of conflict. Never do we say that conflict is the absence of peace. You see, this is the trick question, or war is the absence of peace, because somewhere, once again, what kind of knowledge, who are the people who are proposing these ideas? And knowledge is constructed. That's many of us believe. You don't have to be a social constructivist to appreciate this. And that's where the problem starts. Because like many disciplines of social sciences, I mean, I should say almost all disciplines, partly you can say history has a skid, but not really. Most of these disciplines are under this constant spell of what we very generally or generically describe as the Western knowledge system. Now, this is a term that has come to usage for good reasons and also for some not so good reasons, as if there is a non-Western knowledge system and Western knowledge system is just one and singular unified way of thinking, which is not the case at all. But then, assuming that there is a connect between power and knowledge, peace and conflict studies has also been under the spell, under the domination of this so-called Western knowledge system. And this has had implication for the issues that relate to philosophy, normative sciences, and so on and so forth. The reason being that if you look at the genealogy of the term peace, for instance, I mean, it's a different focus, and elsewhere I have written and everybody knows about it, that in different cultures and different languages, for instance, peace is used very differently. The Chinese definition of peace is different. The Indian, or in our ancient text, rarely do we come across the idea of peace in relation to war or violence. But peace is more like harmony. Peace is more like, a holistic notion wherein everybody could flourish and so on and so forth. But that's a little different debate, and perhaps some other day we can talk fully on this particular subject. So different cultures, different approaches, or different times, peace has been defined very differently. So this has implications, the Western knowledge system, in the sense that there came a point in social sciences. In fact, as you know, that it's a problematic, it's a little problematical, I should say, to define the term science in relation to social sciences. I mean, what exactly are we trying to say? Actually, it's not wrong. I mean, we can say peace sciences. I mean, I can even go as far as to say philosophical sciences. Why not? How do we look at the term science? I think that is the clinching point. And I think here, what we saw in recent decades and past 50, 60 years since probably the end of Second World War in 20th century, for instance, that the disciplines like peace and conflict were dominated by rationalist and behavioral discourses, which did not allow any scope for normative and values or any standards into that. And that's how you see that peace studies, instead of really being a utopian thing, and utopias are not bad. You have to think, like if somebody in peace research, for instance, Gandhi was often called as a utopian thinker. So what? You need to see a utopia in order to arrive at a world which is superior than what you have today. But then it was not allowed. There was hardly any space for this so-called normative values, religious values, and so on and so forth. So that is the reason why many normative and cultural values and philosophies could not find a rightful position in the discipline of conflict resolution, the discipline of conflict transformation, or peace and conflict issues. But lately there is a realization that only the empirical study of war, violence, and conflict won't do. We need to have certain standards, certain values to sort of create a roadmap for the direction in which peace can go. It's not simply the cost and benefit analysis. It's not simply a rationalistic attitude that will bring peace to us. And therefore, a lot of values and cultural values, religious values, and utopias that were not earlier reckoned with in social sciences and in peace and conflict studies, they have come on the fore. And one of the transformations that has come about is the acceptance of religious knowledge or religious traditions and religious standards as a resource of peace building. I mean, not long ago, religion was mostly described as a resource of conflict and violence. I mean, whether it is Reni Giga and when all kind of these philosophers and thinkers, they would describe religion as at the heart of violence. And so much so that in international forums like United Nations, it was not easy to take a debate on religion on the platforms. So much so that I remember that when we were bidding for this UNESCO Chair for Peace and Intercultural Understanding. So at that time, what I had in my mind and what we had proposed was the Chair for Peace and Interreligious Understanding. But everybody suggested that, look, perhaps this religion is a taboo word as far as the issues of diplomacy, issues of war and peace are concerned. And we had to, they said, instead you use the term intercultural. So we did. But now today, even the United Nations has not only accepted the importance of religious values or religions, different religions, as a vector of peace, but they have set up a lot of new initiatives. In fact, very recently, last month itself, I was asked by the United Nations to lead a mega project, a worldwide project on studying the good practices or innovative practices within the sphere of interreligious dialogue and interfaith dialogue, which promote peace. A realization, perhaps it's a post 9/11 realization or whatever. So this is a golden opportunity for people who work in the larger gamut of philosophy and religious studies to look for an opportunity to contribute to their lot to the burgeoning literature and action ideas relating to peace building. I have worked, and I know your professor has also worked on or is working on the Hindu methodologies, Hindu religious understanding, which are useful to expand the canvas of peace building. I mean, we are, many of us can very spontaneously quote many of our sacred texts, Vedas, Upanishad, Bhagavad Gita, even Ramayana, Mahabharata, and all these texts wherein there is a lot that has been that is very useful to the emerging discourses on peace and conflict studies. For example, personally, I believe that in our own tradition, we have a very rich resource to understand the concept of dialogue, whether it is Vade Vade Jayate Tattva Buddha, to all kinds of traditions, Shastrarth, Parampara, or even the respect for diversity and pluralism is quite pronounced as far as the Hindu long lineage of Hindu religion is concerned. And also, above all, a holistic understanding of peace, wherein peace includes ecological peace, whether it is Antariksh or the idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So these are the ideas that have enriched the portal of peace building. And in fact, there's a very interesting study which, and of course, yoga itself is not seen entirely in terms of physical well-being, but also in terms of the very nice upcoming studies, sometimes empirical, which have tried to establish the linkages between yoga and peace building, the community peace building. And many of our sages, for instance, Ravi Shankar actually was honored at the center stage a few years ago, I suppose, when Colombian civil war came to an end. he was one of the top awardees of the national recognition in Colombia, because his yoga exercise had in practice done things for the alleviation of trauma and disaffection in Colombia. So these are many practical examples that can be cited. But yes, so I mean, I took up the case of Hinduism. Buddhism, of course, is very important and hardly needs, because I thought that I will very consciously refrain from making too many comments about different values and different statement. Buddhism, Jainism, everybody who's interested in anything about philosophy or own tradition can quote several statements, several practices, several paradigms where these our homegrown, and the same is true about Sikhism, for instance, great eclectic religion. So our own religions have been quite full of these ideas, peace ideas and practical ideas, which also transmitted in action. And I think in Mahatma Gandhi, they all fructified so well, whether it is the notion of non-violence, whether it is the notion of respect for all religions and so on and so forth. But in other religions also, like there is no limit. If we believe that only our religions had these elements of peacefulness, I think we are a little short of a complete understanding. I mean, Judaism, if you really want to search for it, which was perhaps the most ancient monotheistic religion in the world, and it precedes Christianity and Islam, also had a lot of such scriptures and Torah's laws, which described the imperative of peace building and so on and so forth. And Christianity also has many important dimensions of peace. And if we see Jesus himself was a great exemplar of non-violence in his own life and death. So these forgiveness and reconciliation, these remarkable notions of forgiveness and reconciliations, these are dominant themes in Christian teaching and Islam too. Why should I say too? It's a fact that Islam also constitutes a further set of religious traditions arising out of Judaism. See, the point is, I mean, you know, like you see what you look for. So there are innumerable writings which are very convincing, which talks about the contribution of peace building in Islamic thought and also practices. And the point is, are we really willing to see it? Are we really willing to give importance to the great traditions of Bhakti and Sufi, for instance, Sufi tradition itself, which is still thrives world over and which still offers a beacon of hope to quiet and to sort of do things which contribute to the peace building and so on and so forth. I mean, you know, the point is that every religion, every dogma has these, both the elements, peaceful and not so peaceful. I mean, benign and probably if you call it non-benign or malignant, all religions. The point is what you really choose, what you really look for. And end of the day, perhaps we can argue that in our own homegrown religions, if you make a calculation, the examples and the ideas of non-peacefulness are not so heavy, are not so crucial as are the ideas of peacefulness. And at the end of the day, it is the peacefulness that scores the point. So that probably every religious, I mean, you know, there is a, still it's now a diminishing breed, but a couple of my Marxist students once gave a very sort of convincing presentation on how Karl Marx also was had ideas and has philosophies that, despite the fact that Marx is known to have this class struggle and he legitimizes violence in that sense, but end of the day, the idea was that it was all done. It was a means to get eventual to clean the way or pave the way for peacefulness. So what I'm trying to say, whether we like or not, like for instance, Noam Chomsky argued that actually the communist societies of the 20th century betrayed these original ideas of Marx and Engels. Otherwise, Marxism would not have come, wouldn't be construed, wouldn't be sort of taken as a non-peaceful or a lethal kind of ideology which preaches violence. But these are all great points of debate and discussion. But if we can start from the Greeks, as our syllabus does, the writing of, although, I mean, the fact of the matter is that, in traditional discourses on peace studies, people begin with Thucydides and then go up to Kant, etc., to provide the generic basis of peace studies. In our own tradition, we can talk about Upanishad, Ved, and so many religious texts, which even goes back farther back into the history. So this is not a race and a competition, but look at the Greeks, the writing of Plato, who actually focuses on justice as an important element in any broad concept of peace. Now, this is another stream, and that I thought that it's important for the students and the scholars of philosophy to understand that peace not for the sake of peace, because the idea is that peace, which only preaches peace, misses the bullseye, in the sense that if there is no justice in the society, peace will not sustain itself. And that is the reason, if you see that the recent pronouncement of the United Nations spell out very clearly that peace must go hand in hand with the with the concepts of development, human rights. In fact, the most recent definition of peace as conceptualized by the Secretary General is sustaining peace, which is an argument which says that there is nothing like peace for the sake of peace. Unless we accomplish all the 16, 17 sustainable development goals, there will be no peace. So this is presenting peace in a wider canvas, and I think to an extent then it brings us back to what our ancient philosophers and sages had sort of proclaimed long centuries back, that peace has to be a planetary peace. And this is what these arguments are coming in. But justice is important. And if you look at the writings of Plato and Aristotle, I think the initial inspiration to peace studies and conflict resolution studies came through these writings. And the idea was that it is by promoting the ambience, promoting, for instance, though Aristotle does not talk upfront of the philosophy of peace, but there are many references points in its development of virtue ethics, which legitimizes, which is linked, which can be linked to the philosophy or ethics of peace. So the Greek traditions and perhaps the in terms of disciplinary orientation, the more clear examples can be sought from Thomas Hobbes, who was both a writer and a politician, and whose writings were motivated by the overarching concern on how to avoid civil war. As you know, Leviathan was his articulation, which basically says that human nature is essentially self-interested, and thus the natural state of humankind is one of chaos. The state of nature might is right, and it was full of chaos, and many people. Then Hobbes sees the essence of war as not merely the action of fighting, but a disposition to fight, and this exists only because there is a dearth of an overarching law enforcement authority. So Hobbes onwards, we got into this uh, mode of thinking of an external agency which can prevent warfare, which can provide justice, which can ensure that peace is established. And essentially because Hobbes had this very negative vision of human nature, an idea that actually then traveled all the way to the modern times, where the realist thinkers like Hans J. Morgenthau, they articulated that the human nature actually reflects two elements. One is selfishness, another is lust for power. And that is how that then in turn reflects in the nature of nation states. So international politics and the politics as such is a constant struggle for power. And in this struggle for power, we could only find peace and order through external agencies or through some controlling mechanism. Another name that's very interesting is the Spinoza. In 17th century, the Dutch philosopher of, as we know, it's a philosophy department I'm addressing. He wrote extensively on a range of philosophical topics, and his relevance for a philosophy of peace is found in advocacy of tolerance in matters of religious doctrine. It is notable that Spinoza asserted, that this is long time back, something that has now come back in 21st century. And he was very categoric, and I quote, "For peace is not mere absence of war, but it is a virtue that springs from the force of character." Now, force of character now brings us to the entire notion of inner peace, the entire thinking, say, of Indian Manishis or Indian sages, who said that inner peace is as much a part of our quest for social peace. So this binary of social peace, peace studies is about social peace, nothing to do with inner peace, was challenged centuries ago by Spinoza himself. And his writings actually are now being used extensively to in the context of interreligious tolerance and so on and so forth. John Locke, similarly, one of the most influential contributors to modern philosophy, he also had his contribution which imbued the later course of peace and conflict studies. And in his treatise of government, Locke very clearly talks about right to life, and then it is the role of political authority to protect this right. The right to life and, and the right not to be harmed anticipates the later notion of right to peace. For many of us, let me say that one of the most revolutionary development in United Nations, unnoticed, because I think the national newspaper and our international media has its own points to score when they talk about more interesting things, but right to peace was passed by the United Nations General Assembly after a struggle of almost 3 decades, just a few years ago in the United Nations General Assembly. Although it is yet to find that enforcement mechanism, but this was a remarkable success, and perhaps many of us would know that there exists something like right to peace. So Rousseau also, I mean, they're talking about the Hobbes and Locke, we must talk a little bit about Rousseau anticipates common themes in peace theory, and especially the center the countercultural and alternative peace movements of 60s and 70s were quite inspired by the arguments which Rousseau posed, that peace involves a conscious rejection of corrupting and violent society, a return to a more naturalistic and peaceful existence, and a respect of affinity with nature. Now, this is Rousseau, who talks about ecological peace, if you please, in that sense of the term, and he says that our social contract is meaningless unless if it is done at the cost of nature. And Rousseau suggests that the way to peace through a more powerful society rather than through a system of peace. So all these ideas, and eventually we come to Immanuel Kant, who of course is the most powerful modern philosopher, because he talked about a universal ethics and a cosmopolitan outlook, which provides the most extensive basis for a philosophy of peace. The starting point for the ethics of Kant is the philosophy of duty, and the ethics based on duty, and particularly the duty to act so that what one does is consistent with what are the reasonable desired universal results, as Kant calls as categorical imperative. This notion was expounded by Immanuel Kant in 1785, and many peace researchers actually find Kant as the forefather or the founding father of the ideas of peace studies. Now, endless is the stream. Hegel, for example, and his methodology, many argue that Johann Galtung, one of the lead scholar of modern social sciences and peace research, derived many of these ideas from dialectics. But then I have worked with Johann Galtung, and once I mentioned that how inspired you were by the Marxist, and he said, no, Hegel, etc. I just borrowed their technology, not the essence, not the ethos of, not where they wanted to reach. And so these philosophical methods and ideas have tried to, then talking about the contemporary sources for philosophy of peace, no greater example than our own Mahatma Gandhi, whose ideas on peace and non-violence continue to inspire the society, and especially his the visions that the eclectic visions that he derived through his ideas that he got from different religious traditions, different cultural traditions, gave him a tremendous worldview of how peace can be attained. And one of the most remarkable notion of Gandhi was that peace can never be attained by non-peaceful means. And this is something that interrogates all our nation states and their leaders, who mostly talks about attaining peace through violent means. And Gandhi was very categoric that no, peace cannot be attained through non-peaceful means. And more important is Gandhi's understanding, once again, a broader canvas, and that peace without social justice, peace without values has no meaning at all. In fact, perhaps anybody who reads the peace studies would reckon with the fact that Johann Galtung actually is often attributed to be the founding father of peace studies. And one of the notions which Johann Galtung gave, and which is used in most of the social sciences discourses, is that of structural violence and cultural violence also, and in which Johann Galtung argues, he must be 100 now. I haven't heard he's still with us, but I didn't hear that he's not with us. So Johann Galtung is quite a remarkable scholar of many disciplines. Actually, it is through Johann Galtung that philosophical traditions and trajectories have got their entry into peace research. Prior to that, it had become almost a rigorous, empirically based, conflict data-based research. in which there was the conflict resolution experts would often calculate as to the probability. I remember when I was a master's student at JNU, there were two American professors who were big international relations scholars then, and they came and they gave series of lectures how to predict a conflict on the basis of data, that after so many years, if the conflict has taken place, so be prepared for another war after so many years. It was Johann Galtung who brought it back, and he said that, well, violence is not, peace is not simply the absence of direct violence. It is also the absence of indirect violence. And what he meant indirect violence was that both the absence of structural violence as well as the absence of cultural violence. In fact, he used to give personally, I remember when my students got really bored, so I stopped giving them in class. But Johann Galtung himself will give an example that you see, direct violence is one that a child dies in a war-like situation through a bullet. Then a child dies or out of starvation because of famine. That is a structural violence. Structural violence could be seen in caste, could be seen in even gender, the patriarchal society, and the structures are to be changed if the violence has to be rooted out. And cultural violence, good example, that when you don't consider that the cultural violence takes place, for example, wife beating or like domestic violence for long years in our society, and still now we don't see it as an act of violence. And that, according to Johann Galtung, was the cultural violence. When we don't acknowledge the episodes of structural violence as violence, this is engaging in cultural violence. It's a grand literature worth reading, very complicated. In fact, his last notion on cultural violence is such that it's a challenge for scholars. You read it 10 times and you can't, and he's a cynical man, but worth reading and all. So anyway, why I'm a little fascinated that the first time I worked with him in 80s, he was called me out and he said, "Are you from Varanasi?" I said, "Yes, I work there." And then he winked at me. He said, "You know, Varanasi has made me what I am today." I couldn't make out. And he said that, "Look, I'm known throughout the world because of this concept of structural violence." And the fact is that on the river bank in the Institute of Gandhian Studies, I don't know if you know that in Banaras, there is this Rajghat. We had this Institute of Gandhian Studies, which for many decades now is in a decadent shape. And like most other Gandhian institutions, I'm sorry to say this, but that's the fact. And actually one reason why we decided not to name our own peace center on Gandhi, because as if there is a sharp to that, as a curse to that. So in the sitting on, I think mid 60s, sitting 64, or he was telling me the year, he just noticed one particular sentence struck him of Gandhian thought, and it was, "Hate the sin, not the sinner. Hate the sin, not the sinner." Now that like Eureka came to him, that what exactly Gandhi is saying, that it is these structures. Nobody is born good or bad. Nobody is born terrorist. Nobody is born a murderer. It is the circumstances. It is the social system, rituals, the legitimization of violence that makes us do those crimes. So unless we attack them, we cannot, bring about a long-lasting peace. So that led Johann Galtung to conceptualize this idea of structural violence, and as you know, it happens n number of times. I mean, in terms of diversity, literature, pluralism, dialogue, Indian culture, tradition, philosophy is so rich, but unless they are repackaged in a in Western concepts and pedagogies, they don't even receive our attention. So is the way of life here. So Johann Galtung repackaged it in structural violence and became, so this is another instance of how philosophies interact. And structural violence, incidentally, is the key term, the pivotal term that is used. Martin Luther King Jr. and Gene Sharp, then another very remarkable person. We lost him, I think, in 2018, and he was a very frequent visitor to our Peace Center and to Banaras. And he's written extensively. And if you have to see how he brought in the non-violent action into today's realities, I mean, his notions and his sort of argument that non-violent action can still work wonderfully well is something that needs to be recognized and perhaps followed also, in the sense that when you have a situation of you can resist in a non-violent manner, things have changed a lot, and it's very difficult to justify these thinkers in a black and white manner. But finally, I will end up after giving you a couple of things. As you know, that I work very actively with the UNESCO. In fact, in 2019, I was at the General Assembly on the invitation of the President of UN General Assembly, and there to celebrate 20 years of culture of peace. Now, this is one of the most remarkable contributions that has come from the world agencies, UNESCO, etc. And I was so happy to note that in this particular program, once again, this culture for peace